It's mid-February, and today's show is actually called Why Study Black Church History. Really, I'm going to want people to almost take this and also see why they should study church history in general.
Yep.
But we're going to narrow it down here. Why study Black church history? We're going to give 5 reasons, all right? 5 good reasons why you should study Black church history. So I'll state the reason. I'll let you take it off, and then I'll play off you. And reason number 1 why you should study Black church history: to be encouraged, challenged, and inspired.
Well, I think what you see in the history of blacks in around the world, but particularly, I'll just focus on for now blacks in this country. You'll see is how God sovereignly draws people to Himself in the midst of terrible circumstances. And when you really study slavery in this country and how horrific it was, and how slavery then led to Jim Crow, and then how it led to, all the other things, all the things that different Black Americans have suffered in this country, and yet seeing how particularly believers continue to follow the Lord, and some of the things that you see there, they say it will encourage you. It also challenge you, because I remember reading a sermon by Richard Allen. So he's one of the guys we'll feature, considered the father of the Black church, and he wrote this sermon about slaves forgiving slave masters. And it challenged me because the more I studied slavery, and I read something recently about how people as young as 3 years old were made to work the fields, right? As when slavery was instituted in this country, and just so many things. It's just horrific, and you think you should just be filled with hate after experiencing something like that. And yet he writes, just compellingly about how the gospel gives us the ability for slaves, especially free slaves, to forgive the slave master. Just amazing things, just that when you read the sermons and stuff of many of these Black Christians that we've been highlighting. And so I think, as I said, encouraged, challenged by that, and inspired to stand for the things that many of them held to stand for faithfulness to God in the midst of suffering, to stand for justice. Many of the things that we see in the civil rights movement is encouragement towards that. A lot of things, and the right ways to do it, we can find in Black church history.
Yeah, for example, Harriet Tubman. There's a story where a slave was escaping. This was when she was 13. She was a young girl. And one of the dudes on the plantation said, "Hey, you, help me stop this guy." And she didn't move. And so the dude on the plantation threw a 2-pound weight at the runaway. Harriet stepped in front of it, and it hit her full force in the forehead, knocked her unconscious for days, slipped in and out of a stupor. And as she recovered, she had a prayer for her master, who through this, "Change his heart, Lord." But for the rest of her life, she suffered from sleeping sickness and would even black out sometimes, even when she went on the Underground Railroad. And eventually she became angry, though, more and more. And then she prayed this prayer: "Lord, if you're never going to change Massa Broda's heart, then kill him, Lord. Take him out of the way." Well, within weeks, he became sick and died. And she became terrified that she was the one who did it. And then actually had great sadness and said, I would get basically everything back if I could just have him back and witness to him and share the gospel with him one more time.
Wow.
So that's an example. Or this is a little different context. Eliza George, 1879 to 1980. She was a missionary to Liberia, grew up in Texas, studied at Central Texas Bible College. She was involved in the student volunteer movement. But then when she was all ready to go on her mission, she wanted to go to Africa. The Texas Baptist leader said they had no intention of sending a black woman on a mission. She did not give up, though, and finally, in 1914, she was supported by the National Baptist Convention. She began a ministry in Liberia, where she served as an evangelist, a church planner, founded the Bible Industrial Academy. By the 1960s, this movement she began had 27 churches, and she remained active in ministry until she was 90. Eliza Davis George. Just an example, how hard is it to be a missionary, first of all?
Yeah.
Then put yourself in that era, a black woman trying to be a missionary. Then think of the church mission board not supporting you to be a missionary. Then you raise your own support and go. And that should encourage, that should challenge, that should inspire as we look at people like that.
Amen. People worth knowing.
Reason number two to study black church history: to become a better ambassador. Now, what I mean by that is, in that list, is the idea of you understand culture better. You understand sort of the world even better. You understand, hopefully by God's grace, other people better, where they're coming from, good and bad, all of that. And so I think this really helps you become a better ambassador for Christ. For example, even little things like this. I think by us doing this series, 30 Black Christians You Should Know, I think it's a challenge to the world to see that kind of unity. And when they walk in a church that's just filled with all kinds of people who have all types of different beliefs and look all types of different ways, and they're worshiping the same God and fellowshipping and sharing, I think that's a challenge to the world and what they can and can't do in relation to some serious challenges in relation to diversity and cultures and colors and all that. And I think it's a good witness. So I think that's a good ambassador model. It says, it's like this. Here's what the kingdom of God looks like. Let me tell you about my church. Let me tell you about the forgiveness there. Let me tell you about the different types of people there. And we've got people at our church. One dude used to be involved with like the Black Panther Party. Yeah. Dude was all on that Stokely Carmichael. Dude was all down with the Fives back then. One more NOI. Some of you don't even know what I'm saying, but whatever. We had another guy. I asked him one time, I said, have you ever experienced, because he graduated from ASU engineering degree way back in the day, direct racism? He said, well, there was one professor who said, you might as well not try in this class. You're black. I'm going to give you a C no matter what. And he said he was an older professor, and he said that was the most direct. He said, no matter what you do, you're going to get a
similar
C.
Stories. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you care to share, but I think, but yet now you see those guys, and they're just kicking it. Yeah. You know, they're punching little white kids and giving them toys and hanging out, and there's a real gospel of grace that you see. And I think that's part of the ambassador model. And I think studying Black church history helps us be able to do that better and have a stronger foundation from which to do it.
Yeah, amen. I mean, I just add to that, to do that well then requires moving in love towards one another, being able to see from each other's perspectives, working hard towards unity, and seeing where we disagree, but seeing where we must unite. And in both those ways, I think it really becomes a strong witness to the world.
Reason number 3 why you should study Black church history: to grow in your love and trust for the Lord. Now, that is coming out of, for example, I heard John Piper recently. They asked a question, why aren't there more Black folks who are Reformed? And I love his answer. It was 11 minutes, and he had great insight. But one thing he said, you know, we may not see like the B.B. Warfield Calvinism all throughout the church ages, but we do see some. In fact, the 5 guys we're covering are all considered Calvinists, and some of them are true blue Calvinists, all the way Calvinists, not just kind of Calvinists, you know. But he said, even if you don't see some of that, you know, seminary talk, he's like, listen to the spirituals. Yeah. Because what do you see in the spirituals? Why would those be a good evidence to God, to sort of a reform type of understanding of God's control?
Well, you see a trust in the Lord, a trust in His sovereignty,
no matter what,
an eternal perspective. Is there that it comes from only having a doctrine of a big God, right?
That's giving me the chills,
and that's a reform stream. If there's anything that we want to say the Bible speaks to, that I think Reformed theology rightly points to, is that there's a big God over all things, and that we are in His care.
You listen to those songs, they poured their heart out to God, but they never doubted His goodness, you know? Yeah. You see that trust. Amen. You see that Genesis 50:20. Yeah. You know, Joseph sold into slavery. What you meant for evil, God meant for good.
So, yeah, I mean, as you said in that point, I think you see what it really looks like to love the Lord. Yeah. Right? To love the Lord.
Who's had to do that? Yeah. None of us even around have had to do that. But the thing is, we got to understand there's people who living amongst us who have had similar experiences or direct line from that. And that does affect you, because you hear stories in your family. Yeah. You know, it's just, we got to understand that studying Black church history helps us get in that mode of getting it.
And that's very true. I mean, for those among us who can, I mean, that's what people, it's important to realize. I mean, those things get passed down and they become part of your history. And what you do with it, I think we have a responsibility to steward it. For those who have parents who were during the Civil Rights era, or to those who can trace it further back than that, by God's grace, if you can point to people who love the Lord there, I think it's a great model for us, for what it looks like for us to love the Lord today.
One of the men who was older, I asked him one time, and he says, he talks about knowing relatives who were slaves. Wow. Like, he can go back. Now, he knew them when he was younger, and they were older at that time, but he still has relatives he knew who were slaves. Wow. I mean, you can talk to someone who knew someone who was a slave at one time, right here in these states. And so that goes, but I mean, I just want to stop for a second. Look, just if you look at the stream of what you see in the spirituals and in some of the sermons and some of the lives, you see this strong trust and reliance, despite the circumstances. And I like what Frederick Douglass said, for example, because you could see how this could easily, imagine coming up, this could kind of turn you against Christianity, right? You could totally go. But he said, hey, the Christianity of this land, I'm paraphrasing, but some of you guys know this quote. He says, the Christianity of this land, I hate. It's corrupt, slaveholding, women whipping, cradle plundering, partial and hypocritical. But the Christianity of Christ, I love. And this is a quote: the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ.
I'm continuing.
Praise God, Douglas. He could discern.
I'm continue to be amazed by that. And again, I see the Lord's sovereignty in that. Like there's, if you look at it, there's no reason why blacks in this country should have become Christians, given the fact that they were brought, how they were shown Christ from their slave masters.
I got something on that. Phyllis Wheatley, poet, 1753 to 1784, wrote a poem at the age of 14 called "On Being Brought from Africa to America" in 1773. Listen to this: "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Savior too. Once our redemption neither sought nor knew. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes black as Cain may be refined and join the angelic train."
Yeah.
Now she's even sort of playing into some of the stereotypes, like she's quoting and she's saying, okay, so be it, black as Cain, but we can be part of God's church.
Amen.
I mean, you look at the early church, where did it go? Boom, North Africa. I mean, there's some history here. I mean, you look at Ethiopian, Acts. I'm just saying, there is a train.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important to study. Sorry, I'm getting excited. Phyllis, that poem, as you could imagine, is controversial because she had a strong reliance on God's sovereignty. Yeah. And she's not saying there was a good to the evil.
I think that's important to say. She's not saying...
but we should understand that as believers.
But that's part of that's part of the doctrine. I mean, you might say that's part of a good, I think, what we would call reformed, I call biblical understanding of the scriptures, that even out of evil acts, God brings good.
Yeah, she's first of all, she's only 14. Well, bang. And to be able to say that, this is just Genesis 50:20 to me. I mean, she understands.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just I see the wonder of the Lord, the grace of the God, the sovereign call of the Lord, that people who were under oppression, being given a terrible version of Christianity, were able to discern by God's grace, this isn't right, and able to, some of them illiterate, still able to see, no, this is true Christianity. And obviously that became the bedrock behind many other things that happened in the wake of that, leading all the way into the civil rights movement.
Reason number 4 to study Black church history: to grow in your love for the church.
Yeah. To
grow in your love for the church. What do you think we wrote that one down?
Well, I think one of the things we see in Black church history, you might say in Black American history,
especially look. I'm just saying, guys. Hopefully, you recognize by now, whatever term you want to give it, but the Black experience in America is unique. It's not identical to everybody else's, and just recognize that and say, okay, let me try to respect the special aspect of it, and now let's jump in and learn about some of God's heroes.
Yeah, amen.
When I say that, what I mean is heroes to us, whom God used. I don't mean God like looking up to you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, it's unique, and there's amazing things for us to learn if we're willing to open our eyes and admit our blind spots and see what's there. And I think one of the things we see there is how embedded the Black church was in Black American history. And you might say local church, right, being part of the church and all that goes along with it. I think it tells you just how, when the church is being the church, what it can really do, particularly in times of crisis, how church community became a place for many people to find identity and meaning and significance. That especially when you're in a culture that was demeaning you and seeing you as less than a man.
Yeah, let me give you an example. My friend Matthew Anderson, 1845 to 1928. He was a graduate of Oberlin College, one of the first Black students, you'll like this, at Princeton Theological Seminary. Established, now this is what's crazy. So he goes to Philly. This dude is educated. Now, when he was trying to establish his church as a Presbyterian church, the white folks told him, I think you'd be better off being a Methodist. Maybe a Baptist. The idea was sort of the emotional lower base will appeal to you, not Presbyterianism.
Yeah.
But this dude's like, nah, this is where it's at. You know what I'm saying? I'm a Calvinist. So he goes, establishes this Presbyterian Church of Philly, which is still there, saw the need of the people there in Philly. What did he do? Established a bank, a vocational school, an employment service, a summer resort for excluded Black Philadelphians, such as pastors. I mean, this is a man who focuses on the gospel, but then has real practical implications. About Matthew Anderson.
Yeah, that's wild. That's really good. I mean, this shows how he tied the two together. I mean, he was active in community, and that flowed out of his understanding of the gospel, sort of the implications that flowed out of that. I think one of the things it should say to us today, the thought that comes to mind is just how significant the church can really be, and particularly in a day and age where maybe Christians feel like they're not loved by the general culture, if we can put it that way. I think the Black church experience is important in showing us that no matter what's happening in the culture, there is meaning and significance. The ultimate meaning and significance can be found in relationship to the Lord in context with his people. And
that's key. So that's why we say reason number 4 to grow in your love for the church, because you may have grown up with a traditional Black church experience where it was whack. It was about money. It was about power. It was about control. It was about central authority. It was about yelling at you and controlling you and not treating you like a man. Maybe that's all you saw. Looking back and seeing these men and women, you see the healthy gospel lived out. This should make you grow in your love for the church. Maybe you're not Black. You're Jimmy in the suburbs, and all you know is T.D. Jakes and Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, and that's all you've got. You don't know what's up.
Yeah.
You need to learn about these people to grow in your love for the church, because these brothers and sisters from the past and the present, they are your brothers and sisters. You don't know about them. Look, I want Black kids to look up to Charles Spurgeon, and I want white kids to look up to Ephraim Alphonse. That's a Bible translator, by the way. First African-American Bible translator. This dude is so legit. Eugene Knight has said he's one of the best who was able to do. I mean, so you even got missionaries who are Bible translators going over there. 1896 to 1995, that guy. That should make you grow in your love for the local church and see that. Yeah. So, sorry, I'm getting carried away.
No, I'm with you. I mean, there's such great treasures for people to find and to draw from, and especially when when you go back and you're reading what they wrote and what they said,
you're like, dang,
and understanding the context in which they said the things that they said. It will do a lot, and I think it's a part of our church history that is slowly being reclaimed. And if anything, what we're trying to do is maybe shine a even brighter light on it.
Yeah. So I believe it'll help you grow in your love for the local church. Number 5, last one, to declare and display gospel values. This kind of ties them all up. But what we're saying is that unity, true unity in Christ, that's a gospel value. Forgiveness at the foot of the cross, that's a gospel value. Looking past what man may think is important or unimportant and seeing the true need of man and woman, and seeing them made in the image of God, that's a gospel value. When we start studying Black church history, we see examples of that. We see counterexamples, and we're able to declare and display these gospel values that we see in the lives of these men and women. For example, I think it's a further extension, but it's a gospel value that we're to do everything for the glory of God and Sola Deo Gloria type vibe. To me, George Washington Carver. So, for example, he was on a Senate hearing thing. They were asking him, where did you learn all this? From a book. What book? The senator asked. The Bible. And then here's what Carver said about the peanut in the Bible. He has revealed to me some of the wonders of the fruit of his earth. And then he continued to talk about Genesis 1, where it says, behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, and which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And then Carver said, there is everything there to strengthen, nourish, and keep the body alive and healthy. So he started playing around with the peanut and see what you can get out of it. To me, that's Genesis 1. That's a gospel value ultimately. I'm just saying, when we dig in Black church history, it helps us to declare and display those in ways we maybe didn't know exist before.
Yeah, well, that brings in what you said before. Just the Black experience is unique, and because of that, I think there's ways in which different ways of looking at certain values that we have, that we begin to realize how the fuller breadth of the gospel and the values that go along with the gospel. That in communication with one another, we begin to see that, and particularly as we look at Black church history, some of those things I think are really compelling and powerful and important for us to see.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, V, I've got other folks I can bring out, but what do we want to do? Before we get out of here, I want to make sure we give people some resources, because some people may be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, I'll tell you why I lean on this, and here's what I mean by that. I like resources that aren't merely academic. I'm cool with academic study of, the Black church in the States. That's cool. I like the ones who focus on the evangelistic, the orthodox, the inspirational aspect of these folks. I like the ones who kind of look through Black history through the lens of Black church history, if that makes sense. I like those books first and foremost. I think they're the most helpful. I'm not saying that's where we stay. There is definitely academic pursuits that need to be undertaken. But let's talk about some books that you want to say, hey, here's some good resources to help you jump into studying Black church history.
Yeah, I mean, I'll point out the ones that I'm most familiar with. Carl Ellis has a book, Free at Last, A Gospel and African American Experience, sort of just a standard text and extremely helpful.
I love the glossary in the back.
Yeah.
I can just see some old white guy picking that glossary up and be like, "Oh, okay, he's got all the words now." I love that. Right. I love that book, but it's got that weird color art. I feel I swear when sometimes people don't know how to draw Black people, they be drawing them all weird, man. Like it's like high school.
That's funny.
You know what I'm talking about, don't you? The weird shades and hues. It's like that's not how my friend doesn't look like that.
So, I'm Being Black and Reformed by Anthony Carter is another good book. The Decline of African American Theology by Thabiti Anyabwile. Anthony Bradley has a couple of good books as well.
The Bible and Black Experience.
Yep, Liberating Black Theology. So, lots to check out there.
Another one, Free Indeed, Heroes of Black Christian History by Mark Sidwell. And a more academic text, Black Atlanta Writers of the 18th Century. Good stuff.